see my great dear friend. We're the two unlikely knights.
Yep.
We're the two most unlikely knights. I'm the son of Jewish immigrants from Germany for all the well-known reasons. But Anish.
And I'm the son of...
Anish is a very special individual because he has a Jewish Iraqi mother. Is that right?
Correct.
But also a Punjabi father. And he has a rather amazing...
I'm properly mixed up.
He's really mixed up, even compared to myself. And consequently, he's an even greater... He's a much, much, much greater man than I am. And a man of an incredibly creative, extraordinary human being whose sculptures, paintings, drawings... I mean, his art, who's an artist who's really kind of done extraordinary things all over the world, even from the very, very beginning, but of course is particularly well known for that extraordinary object, that great bean in Chicago, which has become the symbol of one of the great cities of the world. And even just to do that alone, I think, is a very remarkable thing. So, ladies and gentlemen, will you welcome, seated though he is, my friend Anish. I've had the privilege of organising 3 or 4 exhibitions with him, writing about him from time to time. But Anish is first going to speak to us a little bit about sculptures, accompanied by, I think, some nice visuals, just to put you in the picture. It's a pity we can't really see our audience, you know. We can just see one of those great big black holes out there, which Anish knows a great deal about, and we're going to talk about black a little bit later on, I hope. But anyway, let's look at...
So I'm going to thank you, Norman, for all that. Let's joust a little, as we are two unlikely knights. I'm going to read just a short passage from Levinas, a great Jewish philosopher. And it's all about sculpture, really, at least the way I see it. It says, when the form of things are dissolved in the night, the darkness of the night, which is neither an object nor the quality of an object, invades like a presence. In the night, we are riven to it, and we are not dealing with anything. But this nothing is not that of pure nothingness. There is no longer this or that. There is not something, but this universal absence, in its turn, a presence. I love those contradictions. An absolutely unavoidable presence. It's not the dialectical counterpart of absence, and we do not grasp it through a thought. It is immediately there. That's another very important thing for a sculptor. It is immediately there. There is no discourse. Nothing responds to us but this silence. The voice of this silence is understood. It frightens, like the silence of those infinite spaces Pascal speaks of. There is, in general, without it mattering what there is, without our being able to fix a substance, a substantive to this term, there is an impersonal form. So I love the idea of the object, or as I'll try and talk about it, the non-object, being this thing that has an inevitable impersonal quality and reality. Something that one tumbles into. I mean, I feel deeply that it's not possible for an artist to have anything to say. That I'm going to talk for a while, but that's irrelevant.
Words. What is the use of them all?
Precisely. But that in that nothing to say is implied the notion that working is about the possibility of a kind of excavation that makes other things possible, that brings things forward. So one of the things I think I've discovered in making my work is the idea of the non-object. And then one goes about wondering what it means. What is this weird notion that somehow for every physical thing there's a non-physical thing. I mean, we understand in physics that most of the matter in the universe is not present. Is it possible for an artist to work with that? So this is an idea I had about whether it was possible to make a work out of smoke. Smoke, it's theatrical smoke. And so an attempt to make an object which is essentially a non-object. The air in the room is spinning, and it makes this thing. A thing which is not a thing.
But it is visible.
It's visible, it's there, it's present, it's very theatrical. It's, in a way, a kind of ritual. So I'm going to talk about ritual a little bit, because my early work is, in a way, a laying out of stuff in a sense that is very performative. I'm showing you works from, these are works from 81.
Which is called 100 Names.
No, this is after. This is a work called As If to Celebrate, I Discovered a Mountain Blooming with Red Flowers. It's a modified haiku poem. And I like the idea that what's implied in it is the act of laying out these piles of pigment. They, of course, poke out of the ground like icebergs, the implication being that most of the object is hidden underneath, that it's not fully revealed, that it doesn't fully show itself. This is a work called White Sand, Red Millet, Many Flowers. As you can see, the titles have very much to do with the sense of a kind of performed act of,
but also
of
trying
very,
to
a very
achieve
particular.
the essence of colour, or trying to grasp the essence of colour.
Yeah.
What is colour?
We'll get there.
We'll get there.
But what I began to feel was that I'm really not interested in composition. And here I've just shown you two works which are compositional. Let's say they're made of bits that relate to other bits. And I found that even though I was acting out some kind of process of a ritualized object, they seemed too dependent on the way that they related to other parts. So I began to turn the objects inside out. And this is the first of those works, which is called Mother as a Mountain. Of course, I'm deeply interested in interiority, and I think that's the thing that was beginning to emerge here.
Move to the next one, I think.
No, this is Mother as a Mountain. Yeah. So interiority, it's as if the object was kind of beginning to fold back on itself. And then here's Mother as a Void. After making all those works with lots of objects in them, I went through a bit of a crisis and found myself making these empty dish forms. And I began to use this very, very dark blue. It's a dark indigo blue. The thing about them is that even though they were emptied out, I suddenly realized that they weren't empty at all, that they were full, but full of darkness. And I realized that that's what I was really interested in, that what was implied in the ritual space that I think I was trying to evoke in the earlier pigment pieces had turned into this dark, dark place. Here's a work called Adam. Of course, you stand a stone up. It's immediately human just by the fact that it stood up. What I did was carve the interior of the stone out and paint it, pigment it again with this very dark blue. It sits on the surface of the stone, almost like a painting. So it's hard to tell in reality that it's a whole. So I'm interested in that. It's a space full of darkness. The deepest dark, of course, is the dark we carry in ourselves. It isn't just phenomenological. I think the fact of recognition is a really important thing. So this is a work called Void Field, which I showed at the Venice Biennale in, I've forgotten when, 1990. And these are 2, sometimes 3-ton stones that are completely hollowed out, that have just this little dark spot. So they are vessels of emptiness, even though, of course, they're great big lumps of stone. Anyway, there we go. I next thought I'd make a work called Descent into Limbo. Of course, titles always come last, but this is a building with a big hole in the floor. A very dark, dangerous, big hole in the floor. I'd say about 7 feet in diameter. And it is,
how deep?
Again, deep, to the center of the earth. Deep, deep.
So don't fall in.
Well, think of Yves Klein here for a second. Yves Klein kind of throwing himself in that photo montage, as he does, throwing himself off the edge of a building. The sublime adventure. I think I'm trying to say that...
Into the void.
Into the void, indeed. But I think I'm trying to say that it's not a photo montage, it's real. Let me tell you just quickly a little story. There was, I showed this work at Documenta in whenever it was, 92. And you make a room, close the door, and of course there's always a line. So there was a man who stood in line and waited in line for 45 minutes and walked into the room and said, "I've done a lot of things." Furious, he was furious. "I've done a lot of things in the name of contemporary art, but I've never stood in line for 45 minutes to look at a black carpet." Now, so first of all, for me, that's total success. Then he took his glasses, he must have had a cheap pair of dark glasses, but he took his glasses off and threw them at it in fury. And of course, they went down the hole. And he was utterly terrified. So he stood against the wall, and and it is like that. It's frightening. And I think that's what I'm after. I'm after a sense that the darkest dark is the one we carry in ourselves, and we recognize it immediately.
The Germans call the Abgrund, which is badly translated as the abyss.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
The beginning of things.
The beginning of things.
Maybe that's something, let's say, a kind of non-figurative art can do. Maybe it can propose that it is possible to think about the beginning. It's not surprising that Barnett Newman, one of my favorite artists, they're all called Day One or In the Beginning or whatever variation on such thoughts. Anyway, another one of those void pieces in the floor. And then I began to be more and more interested in involuted space. Let's say that the modern adventure, the adventure of form in modernism, one might say with Brancusi, is the bird and eventually the rocket, up and onward, phallic, and forward into the light, out there. There is another proposition about form, which is at the back of the cave, dark, inward, involuted, like the inside of our bodies, unclear, but always doing this with itself, always turning itself inside out. And I'm interested in what that is and what it could lead to. I suspect it's another ritual language. And I keep coming back to this because I feel it's the essential matter. Anyway, this is a work called My Body, Your Body. I guess you can't see it, so it doesn't matter. You're not meant to see it. And then this is a work I showed in New York called Memory, much, much later, but a big form made of steel, and on the other side of the room, the interior of the form. So the negative, the inside of that body, if you like. And I like the idea that sculpture is an act of memory, is that it's not a picture. It doesn't reveal itself. You have to do this, and then you have to do that.
They're almost disconnected.
Yeah, they're almost disconnected. Well, I mean, the proposition here is that they are literally disconnected. Anyway, so one of the other themes that's sitting in all of this is the non-object, the object that isn't an object. And this is a moment. I was in Ayers Rock in Australia, and I wrote in my notebook a white form on a white wall. It could be anything. I then came back and made this work, which I eventually called When I'm Pregnant. And it's a pregnant form. And what it does, if it's made right, is that it disappears. So it's a big object that you can see from the side, but it kind of isn't there. And I'm interested, of course, in that problematic. Okay, so I made pigments things and white things, and they were all to do with color. And I wondered somewhere along the way if it was possible to do the same thing with mirror. Is it possible to fill a space up with mirror, just as a space might be full of darkness? And I found that it is in the right conditions, and it has to do with how well a thing is made. They have to be made pretty amazingly. My dear colleague Jeff Koons makes mirrored things, but I'm going to say that he has it relatively easy in that convex mirrors reduce the scale of all that's reflected in them on the positive side of a form. But when they're concave, everything is magnified. So the surface has to be unbelievably good if it's going to do what it must do, at least in my terms. So anyway, concavity does strange things to space. It isn't a reflection, it's a reflection upside down. It's as if one was thinking in painting terms, then it's as if the painting is not beyond the picture plane, but in front of it. The image hangs.
I remember seeing this on the Downs and
in the south of England.
In the south of England.
Yeah.
It was like an inverted constable. You were really looking at an amazing panoramic kind of landscape painting. And it was very extraordinary because it wasn't real, yet it was unbelievably real through looking at the reflection, both behind and in front.
Mirrors are very surprising, yes. Anyway,
magic even.
This is in the Louvre, in the Mesopotamian galleries in the Louvre. Anyway, let's go on. Yeah, Cloudgate. I don't know. Yeah.
People are getting married underneath it, don't they?
Yeah, I think it's turned into the sort of terribly, the ultimate selfie object, which is terrible, terrible. When I first made it, I went there and I thought, oh no, this is Disneyland. What have I done? You know, I've made an object that's too popular. So I sat with it for a while and I thought, really, is that what it is? Is this Disney? And it took me a while to understand that the mystery of it, if there is such a thing, is that it has no scale. Scale, I think, is one of the great mysteries of being, especially of sculpture, but of being in general. And because this object has no joints at all, it's hard to tell how big it is. So when you're with it, it's big, but when you step just a short way away from it, and it's no longer big. And I think that is just enough to keep something that you can't quite grasp.
Huge engineering operation.
It is that too. It is that too. But I hope that saves it from being Disney, or from being too much. You know what I mean. Anyway, here's a work called Sky Mirror in a park, which was in a park in London, Hyde Park in London, and then here in New York, bringing the sky down to the ground. yeah, like a painting, I guess.
And very magical.
I hope.
The magic of mirrors. I mean, you are as well a kind of you know, you're a magician. And what is so extraordinary about a lot of your works, I think, is that they produce unexpected perceptions that most people wouldn't anticipate.
Thank you, Dean.
There you are.
This is a work called The Healing of St. Thomas, which I made, I've forgotten, a long time ago anyway. And I put it here because it's a little gash, like a fontana, in the wall. But it's in the wall of a room. The idea, I think, is that architecture is an image of the self, or is the self in some ways, and this is another attempt to reach beyond both the room and architecture and kind of propose a different kind of involution. And I put it here because of these. This is a work called Tarantantara, which is the sound of the trumpets in the falling of the city of Jericho. So I was asked to make a work in this building, which was a void. There was just the four walls, enormous power plant of a building. And I decided to stretch a red fabric from one end to the other in a form that came to a trumpet in the middle and widened at the two doors. So very big. And then, so from the outside, because of the trumpet in the middle, the building appears very short, as if all the space in it is eaten away. And then you go into the building and it does that. So it re-expands, it opens itself up again. Again, the inside and the outside. It's as if the inside is bigger. And I think that's one of the things I'm interested in. The inside is bigger than anything that can contain it. And I think that's what this is about.
That's a great masterpiece, which I don't think Anish knew is on view in New York at the moment.
I didn't know it was on.
You can see this incredible painting by Titian, which we first showed at the Royal Academy back in 1984 at the Genius of Venice. It's the first time this painting had been seen in the Western world for 300 years.
The flaying.
The flaying of Marsyas by Titian.
Yeah.
It's now at the Whitney, I dare say not at the Whitney, at the Breuer Met in their exhibition called Unfinished. Though to me there's nothing unfinished about this painting, is there?
Not that I can tell, but anyway.
But then that's another whole question. What is finish?
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as a finished work of art? Probably.
But this is a painting about many things, and one of them, of course, is that it's, I think, a ritual being enacted. The ritual of the interior. By removing the skin, something else is being revealed. But it's also a painting about pride. So Apollo has Marsyas flayed because because he plays the flute more beautifully than Apollo himself. And how could he be so proud as to? So I ended up eventually making a work, which is this one, called Marsyas. I didn't start out to make it Marsyas. I made a work, and it eventually forced itself on me as Marsyas, in that it's a skin, it's stretched. This is the Turbine Hall at the Tate in London. It's stretched across the space. It's an enormous object with openings, completely bodily, 3 openings that sort of in tension with each other, pulling in at the building, revealing an interior, but you can never see the whole object. It's so big that you can't ever see the whole thing. And those are the things that interest me. Anyway, we'll go on. So other works in this form. This is a
lot of your new paintings have a great affinity in a totally different way to the flaying of Marsyas.
I agree. I agree.
Some of them you'll be able to see, I think, next week.
Correct.
In an exhibition that Anish is having at the Gladstone Gallery.
Correct.
Which is opening on Tuesday, to which you're all invited.
Please come. Please come. Anyway, so this is a work called Dismemberment. Oh, search me. I don't know why, but anyway. But I am interested in the idea of yes, I'll tell you. There's a lovely story about dismemberment. The Indian god Shiva, you know, one of the triad of three great Indian gods. His wife Parvati dies, and he has a completely hysterical reaction to that. How could she die? So he picks up her body and flies through the air with it, and bits of her body fall in different sites. Of course, they're all sites of ritual, and they're all sites of power. The most potent of them being the place where her vagina falls, inevitably. And of course, every other place in India claims that her vagina fell here, which I also like. So there's this sense that somehow the body is turned into a place of continual inhabitation, not
Like a relic.
Exactly. So,
like a Christian relic.
well, there is that with it. So when I do dismemberment, I think that's what I'm after, a site.
Though we don't know the relic of the vagina of the Virgin Mary, do we?
I doubt you would, though, but yes, but I think that's...
There we are. I hope I'm not offending anybody here.
I'm sure you're not. Yeah. So the inside and the outside. This is a work which I called Leviathan, which I made at the Grand Palais in Paris. And it is... I arranged the space in such a way that you had to go
in a vast space.
But I arranged it in such a way that you had to go into it first, and this is what you saw on the inside. So a space, cathedral-like, with 3 openings, and then so there's
Try and imagine this object filling the entire Metropolitan Museum from north to south.
That kind of thing.
I mean, that's roughly the size, isn't it?
Yeah. So inside, and then you were once you'd been in, you had to go out between the object and the building, and this is what it was on the outside. So a little. I don't like the word trick, but it's something about form. So what I was doing here, and I don't know that I can show it to you really. Maybe it's there. Yes, each of these forms, so there are 3 bulbous objects tied to each other, but they join each other through narrow necks, and it's the necks that form the holes that you saw earlier on in the inside. Does that make sense? Those holes, those are the necks, and there's a neck, you can just about see it, and these are the so what I wanted, of course, was just like the work Memory. I wanted the inside and the outside not to be related to each other.
But actually, part of the fascination of the piece was the confusion.
Yes, well, that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in that idea that an object can't ever fully be described. Think of Heidegger in that beautiful, beautiful passage where he describes the making of a vase. And he talks about how the clay is put together, and before you know it, there's an object. But it's suddenly holding a void. It's holding it, and the way he writes it is so beautiful. But about the interior and the exterior, and the two never quite meet each other. So this is...
Mystery.
Yeah, something like that, Anyway, a work called My Red Homeland. Oh, don't ask me. I don't know.
This is one of the pieces that converted me to you, actually.
It's a churning of a red waxy material. You know, of course I'm deeply interested in color. I've used color as pigment, I mean, in the form of pigment, and here more like oil paint. So it's, and it's simply moving around very, very slowly. Somewhere that's archaeological in its.
There's
in
also a
its
churningness
process.
of, there's a
Yeah.
churningness, and also there's a dirty aspect to. Anish is sometimes thought of as being an incredibly clean artist and very interested in perfection, but also there's the imperfect, the totally imperfect, and the totally kind of scary, the scariness of the dirty. And you have all these pieces, a lot of which are called dirty corners, and here we have the Great Train. Perhaps you can, this is also which I first saw
so,
in.
Well, I mean, you know, as I say, I have nothing to say, and yet I keep coming up with all these things I have to say. But this is another thing that occurred to me out of the pigment works, is that they were, in a way, they were performed, but it's as if there was no hand in them. You know, minimalism took on the idea that one could make art. Judd took on the idea that one could make art with no, I didn't touch it, it just arrived, it's there. As if always, as if forever. And I think there's something about that which is monadic, which is why Levinas, you know, Levinas writes about the monad, the idea, and it's a very Jewish idea, about a thing.
And here we see this piece in the Royal Academy, but of course it was originally shown at the Haus der Kunst in Munich.
I'm going to show it to you.
Where it had a very, very particular meaning.
Yeah, but
the train, the bloody train, and of course red is many, many things, but red is also, is above all probably blood.
Yes, okay. I'll move on from the monad.
There we are. No, we won't.
Wait. So
Okay.
the monadic, this idea of an absolute singular condition, and this is a word called swayam, which is a Sanskrit word meaning self-manifest. I'm lucky to be able to draw on two big traditions. And they are both very powerful. I mean, Jewish and Indian. Anyway, swayam. So what I did was cast a block of wax and set it on rails and use the building to kind of shit this object. You know, it passes through the doorways, and as it moves, it's formed by the doorways. So it's using the building as a mold. As a like a cookie puncher or whatever,
and it forces its way, and it's a very spectacular piece, of course.
But very
I don't think
dark.
it's ever been shown in America, has it?
No, I don't. No, it hasn't. No. Anyway. So yes, as you were saying, Norman, in Munich it had a very peculiar and particular meaning. Particularly in the Haus der Kunst, which was Hitler's
Palace of Art.
Palace of Art, or then used as Palace of Decadent Art.
No, never, you know, the decadent art was never shown there.
Was it not?
No,
Oh,
the
that was
decadent art
across
was
the
shown
road,
there.
of course, yeah.
And it was shown across the road
Yeah,
at some
yeah.
rather nasty,
Correct.
nasty shop.
Correct. Yeah.
And this was for
Yeah.
grand, the grand art approved of by the dictator.
It's a work called Shooting into the Corner. I was asked to make an exhibition in a space, and I thought, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then I decided that maybe I could put something. I mean, you know, sometimes artists do stuff sometimes which is utterly stupid. But I think out of stupidity comes deeply profound. We are the fools, and I think that's something that, I mean, what I know is of no importance. What I know is of no interest. But what I don't know, how I might propose to myself that an idea might be worth following in spite of the fact that it's idiotic, can sometimes have a deeply profound space in it. So I feel that's what happened with this work. Shooting.
Every 20 minutes or so,
Yeah. So
a guy,
yeah, come out and shoot a pellet of wax about that big into the corner. And it's, shooting into the corners. Of course, it's deeply phallic and sexual, and there's a kind of sexual psychodrama going on between the gun and the corner. The corner being a kind of classical representation of architecture, of culture, in a way one might say of the feminine. There's something, it's almost a Duchampian process of play between these two that's very violent, aggressive, noisy, a bit frightening.
Anticipation plays a big role too. If you're watching it happening,
Yeah.
waiting for the moment, and then maybe missing it because it's so quick.
And then, of course, there's abstract expressionism sitting on the shoulder here, and Goya, dare I say. So lots of things that sit with this. Okay. These are some works I recently showed. They'll be here in New York next week, but I recently showed them at the Rijksmuseum next to Rembrandt. Interesting, slightly frightening, because I made these day before yesterday, and Rembrandt's been around for a good while.
And I can say with my hand on my heart is that they did not fall down.
Good. That's what I was looking for. But that is a
to my eyes, anyway.
That is a test of that's what I went there to see.
Yet you haven't got the room opposite as a slide.
Can they hold the room at all?
You have the opposite. You have the opposite.
Yeah, I don't know that I do. It's
on the other
Rembrandt's.
side. The Jewish Bride.
The Jewish Bride
was opposite.
Just opposite. I'm sorry, I should have, but I don't have a picture of it. Anyway, these are these paintings. So they are flayed. Of course, I've had Rembrandt's bull, the flayed bull, in my studio, a picture of for many years. I wasn't intending to make Rembrandt, I promise you. I was just trying to do something that came out of shooting into the corner. The material here is silicon. It's very bodily. It's the stuff that breast implants and other such false body parts are made of. It takes color incredibly, and it's very three-dimensional. So I'll mix up a thing about this big and kind of carry it over. It's not really paint. It's stuff.
Like release of the inside of a body.
Anyway. And then there's Dirty Corner. The corner's terribly important, as you know. Here's just a dirty corner. And then Dirty Corner as it transpired in Versailles. That was a rather interesting experience. I made this work, which Versailles is a very, very difficult place. Most of the art I've seen in the grounds there is too small and doesn't really take on what the gardens challenge. Every tree is clipped to death and everything is just so. And I wanted to do exactly the opposite. I wanted to excavate, turn it upside down, make trouble. And so I made trouble and got trouble.
Because
I gave an interview in which I said that because of course I refer to much of my work as feminine, but I said she was sitting on the lawn, just there on the axis of east-west in the path of the great king. So immediately it was written of as the vagina on the lawn. So we have a vagina on the lawn, and then the moment there's, if it was a phallic object, it would be no problem. But the moment it was a vagina on the lawn, it turned into...
It's actually both, the truth be known.
So I'm just walking around it. It's, of course, a big long tube. It's about 60 meters long and 10 meters high. So it's a big, big object with a vast collection of stones and other paraphernalia. around it on the tapis vert. And then, before you know it, it was covered in, there were many occasions of it being covered in vile graffiti. This is deeply anti-Semitic and deeply offensive. I decided that I was going to leave it there, like that. And then I was asked by President Hollande to go and see him. So I went to see him. And we talked about it, and it became a big story, whatever.
An affair.
An affair, yeah. Anyway, he said to me that he thought that from a pedagogic point of view, it was okay to leave the graffiti. So I thought, okay, Mr. President, that's great. Pedagogically, I will leave it there. And then somebody, a right-wing somebody or the other, deeply offensive. Anyway, he decided to take me to court for displaying anti-Semitic material. So within 2 minutes, I lost the case. We just couldn't do anything. It was a stitch-up of the first order. Anyway, so I said, I'll be damned if I'm going to remove the graffiti. Really. So I decided that it was my artistic prerogative to leave it there. But it was I knew I was going to be arrested. So I decided eventually that I had to find an answer that was in tune with Versailles. So I decided to cover it in gold leaf. Just enough.
And a bandage.
Just enough to cover up the sign, but not to cover up, the fact that there had been graffiti. And I must say, it rumbles on. I got absolute hell for this. I don't understand why, to be honest. I'm glad art can provoke trouble. I can't see why, though. It's about as sexual as if I turn that cup on its side. It's ridiculous. But anyway, c'est français, on comprend. N'est-ce pas?
I agree.
Anyway, there it is.
Any more to see?
Wait, just quickly, I will do the last.
She goes through the last
show
couple
you.
of things quickly, and then we should have
Yeah.
short discussion.
Yeah.
And then we
This
should
is-
open it up to everybody else.
I started with a work called ascension, which is going up, and this is descension, which is perhaps closer to my heart. It's a vortex made from water going into the ground like that, inside and outside, and it does that.
Anish, that's the last of these incredible slides, which represent only a fraction of the work you've achieved, done over 20, 30, 40 years. When was your first work, roughly? Around 1980? Your first kind of work that you stand by?
70, 78, 79.
So it's roughly 40
like
years.
Yeah.
This morning I was reading a book review in the TLS, Times Literary Supplement. Came across this beautiful phrase of Oscar Wilde. I live in constant fear of not being misunderstood. And what do you say to that? You find, your art is a kind of, because it covers so many different, because it's largely abstract, but it's so suggestive on so many different levels. You can say that it's sometimes cosmic, sometimes it's very mathematical, sometimes it deals with chaos theory, it often deals with social interaction, it often has kind of political innuendo, it has religious and even sexual innuendo. So there's so much going on
Do you think I'm confused, Norman?
Do you think, I mean, do you think that is, what does that all mean? I mean, I think that's the reason for your huge success, because I think you have succeeded, partly because of scale. And I mean, there are people who would say, you know, these massive objects are too big, do you know what I mean? Because they are, you know, they're such big works. But after all, Versailles is a great work. And I mean, the pyramids are great work. And why can't we build great pyramids today? And that's what you've somehow got yourself into a social position through, you know, with the help of many friends and so on and so forth, where you can do these things. But at the same time, how private is your work for yourself?
Well, there's 100 questions there. The first thing is that I think there are so many colleague artists who make their work, and I envy them, being able to make their work and stick to a way of going about. You know, a career kind of spans one process. There are so many artists like that. I'm just not one of them. It seems that the work leads me in different directions, and I follow them.
And do you think that?
And I feel they're linked to each other, but they may not all look the same.
And to what extent do you think that has to do with your, you know, the dualistic, at the very least, kind of cultural background that you come out of? The Jewish aspect,
I'm sure
the Western aspect, well, actually at least three parts, and of course the Indian aspect, which are all very, very, very present in your work.
Yes.
For example, you're an amazing collector of Indian art, and you love Indian art, you know a great deal about it.
I do. Why do you laugh? It's because he's talking over me or I'm talking over him? I see, yes.
We know each other so well in the meantime.
Yeah. But I think they're all there, and they're part of my inner landscape. So for me, unavoidable. I wouldn't know how else to function. However, I do believe very, very strongly, and this comes to the question of scale and size of things. I do believe very, very strongly in the Boycean proposition that material has life, that material isn't just material, that material is emotive in the right conditions, and that has holds within it a will to meaning. As I keep trying to say, I've got nothing to say, but a will to meaning within the process of thinking and making, and making is a thinking process. So I think there's something there which is very important. Scale is a part of sculpture. I am completely unabashed about it. There is nothing to be afraid of. It seems that bigness can, of course, be void of meaning, but not if it holds on to scale, not if it has that other, you know, as Barnett Newman says, scale is not a matter of size; it's a matter of meaning.
Because the other big thing for you is what I call the eternal, the kind of universal aspect of your work. And then there is also its contemporaneity. You know, it's of now, but it seems like as though it's forever. So would you like to say anything about the meaning of your work in those three senses? About do you think you relate in some way to contemporary, and the way can you say something about the way you think you relate to the contemporary?
First of all, the most important things one's doing as an artist are beyond one's grasp. That's to say, if there is something contemplative in the work, or if there is something beautiful in the work. What do I wake up in the morning and say, today I'm going to make something beautiful? I can't. So those things are all out of reach. They are things that are there, if you like, because they must be there. And thankfully one has little or no control, really. So what was your question? Sorry.
My question.
It's about contemporary.
Yeah, about the contemporary world of, if you might say, of European culture, Jewish culture, and the world of contemporary Indian culture. Do you think your work fits into that, and does it reflect, as it were, political issues?
I'm deeply interested in politics. I really do believe.
I know you
are. I really do believe that all affirmative acts are political, and I think the role of art at one level is deeply political. However, I'm not interested in agitprop. I'm not interested in making something that has specific declares its political goal
to a particular issue.
I think one can go about that much more cleverly and much more subtly. If Versailles is any kind of example, it seems that a work can draw to itself.
It has become, and in that sense, there is this very important aspect of your work, the self-generative aspect. I mean, the uncontrolled, the aspect of your work that is not in your, appears not to be in your control, even though when you see a work of Anish's, you always know it is yours. So again, this is a kind of strange paradox.
I mean, we're all, I suppose, I don't know about contemporary, to be honest. I don't know whether it's contemporary or not. I don't think it matters. I think what matters here is whether one's, it's inevitably contemporary. How can it be otherwise, in a sense? You can't be outside of your time. We'd love to be, but it's virtually, it's impossible, I think. At the same time, yes, I don't know. One has to pursue what feels meaningful. What I mean by that is that the work has its own pace, its own language, its own. It's as if I go to work in my factory. I say that literally, which is the factory demanded by the work. The work tells me what to do. I don't tell it what to do. And I think there's a big difference between the two.
So when you go to work every morning,
do
you know where the day is going to end?
No.
As it were.
I have no idea where the day is going to end. But I do have some ideas about what I think I might pursue. But they grow out of what I did yesterday or sometime before then.
Are you often amazed yourself at what you have produced and what comes out?
I've just made a work which is in the show here at Gladstone, in the bigger of the two galleries. And I say to myself, where the hell did that come from? I have no idea. Honestly, I have no idea.
It's a kind of landscape, isn't it? Could you describe it?
It's a kind of archaeology, biology, archaeology object. It's both biology and archaeology. But I have no idea where it came from. And I do, oh God, Anish, what are you up to? But I think one has to allow oneself that with all the doubt and fear that goes with it. This sense that somehow it is an adventure. And if it isn't, it's not worth doing. I don't want to do what I've done before. It's too boring.
And what role does science, contemporary science, play in your work, Anish? Well, at many different levels. Obviously, I heard you on the radio the other day talking about the black hole, quite accidentally. I switched on the radio, there was Anish talking about blackness, because blackness has suddenly become, as well as red, you've suddenly become rather kind of almost controversial around the theme of blackness.
Well, I've just started this, I read in the newspaper some months, two years ago, a small article about a defense company, a British defense firm, that had discovered a black that was blacker than any black in the universe. So black that it's sort of...
A paint or a what was it?
Well, I'll tell you in a second. It absorbs 99.8% of all light. So the blackest material after a black hole. So I called this guy up and I said, have you ever thought of this being a visual material? It was made to mask defense, to mask, I don't know, planes or fighter jets or whatever it is. And he said, no, I never thought of it as a visual material, so can we work together? And so we started working together. And it's not a paint, it's a nanoparticle that's put on as a surface and then has to be put into a reactor.
What is a nanoparticle
It's
in this respect?
Infinitesimally small, it's like a paint surface. Effectively...
Does it come in a tube?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. So effectively...
I'm asking the question I think some members of the audience might ask.
Okay, it's effectively put on as a surface and then put in a reactor so that all the particles stand up. So if, for example, a particle was a meter wide, it would have a gap to the next particle of 30 meters, and they'd be 300 meters long. So you can imagine this enormous forest of things standing up. And light goes in and it bounces around and is trapped, can't come out again. That's the principle on which it works. The extraordinary thing about this material, however, is, you know, in the Renaissance, there are two great discoveries, two great moments. Okay, forgive the cliche, but go with me. One is perspective, which centers, which is in a way from the human being out into the distance, a kind of focus of geometry and light and et cetera, et cetera. The other is the fold. So it's all that cloth folding in, that wonderful fold, which is about being. That's the way I see it anyway. It's about being. It's about the inner moments of terror and personhood and all of that stuff. The extraordinary thing about this material is if you have it like that on a flat surface and you fold it, you make a fold in it, the fold is gone. You can't see it. Where's the fold? I promise you, it doesn't exist. So this material is doing something which is fundamentally beyond being. I think that's extraordinary, because isn't it the ambition of art to be immaterial? I would say that's what art's really about, the immaterial.
But have you already applied it to an artwork?
I've tried. Well, at the moment they make it this big, and we've just about managed to make it about that big. And the aim is to, it's got to be big enough to immerse yourself in. So I'm planning a work which has a bridge in it. It's let's say a room 10 times the size of this one, with a bridge in it where all the space is void with this material, so you can't see anything. Wouldn't that be terrifying?
I mean, I've just been sent a question, which I have to ask you. Would you file a lawsuit against another artist using this material if they were able to use it? Surely not.
Of course I would. No. Of course I wouldn't. It's
kind of silly.
Look. I think this whole thing. I know I haven't really. I've tried not to speak about the controversy around this material. And an artist. It started out with an English artist whose name I've forgotten. I'm sorry. Who said, how can it be that you have exclusive rights to this? Now, please, it's just a complete misunderstanding. If this was a material that came out of a tube and we could all use it, then I understand that there would be something to say about why should I have exclusive right to it. The thing is that at the moment it is a highly technical, extremely difficult material.
It's an
and we're
investigation,
investigating something. I've been at it for 2 or 3 years. It may not work. I have no idea. Exclusivity is only to do with the fact that this little company just doesn't have the whatever it takes to work with anybody else. So we're working together. We're trying to discover something. I hope we can.
Got another beautiful question for you, which you may not be totally surprised about. How do you reconcile the fact that you are a male artist dealing with and at times profiting off the void, which historically and symbolically has been considered a female archetype? Beg your pardon.
Good question. Well, we live in a world of day and night and right and wrong and up and down, and I
Even
promise
male
you,
and female.
yeah, male and female. And I promise you, I'm not all male. And, you know, the women in this room are not all female. I mean, there is something in us. I think one of the great freedoms one has to allow oneself as an artist. I used to walk around my studio at one time with a stick across here and put my hands on a stick and be like a hero, you know, because being an artist is heroic. I mean, it's a mythological projection, call it whatever. But equally, I reserve the right to be feminine, to be a woman. In my studio, I am
As
a woman.
an artist.
As an artist, absolutely. And I think this question of territorial occupation of gender is very, very, very problematic. It's our narrow definition.
And it's also, I think, a problem of a very narrow period of time, i.e. the last decade or so, and I think it'll go out of fashion. Would you agree with that? It will not be an issue in 10 years' time.
I understand, but I deeply, deeply sympathize with the idea that more than 50% of our world population is dominated by men. So, you know, we have to be very aware that these are super big issues politically.
Course.
However, poetically, I think we can transgress this space, and we must.
As artists,
I mean,
and
don't
in the
you
world
agree?
of art.
What do you all think? Don't you think it's essential?
Can we turn up the lights? I think we would like to kind of get out of this blackness. Anish and myself, we'd like to communicate with you
Don't
guys.
you agree with that?
A little bit
isn't
more.
it so-
More light.
Come on, agree with me.
Come on, ask a question.
I have some questions. So,
Please.
I stood in line at Documenta, but it was outside, and we had to lie down and look into the hole.
You have to lie down?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
We had to
no.
lie down because we didn't know it was actually whether it was a hole
Yeah.
or whether it was the paint or whatever. Anyway, I ruined a watch. That's how I know that. But my question is this: the very
You weren't
side-
supposed to lie down, but anyway, yes, go on.
We were all lying down.
Oh, no. Okay, anyway,
And
yes.
you explained this very well about the male and female thing.
Mm.
What did that have to do with anti-Semitism? How were,
Search
you
me.
don't know either.
I have no idea. There were 4 occasions when people. The first one was somebody throwing paint, and they threw paint all over it. And I decided the first time around to do the right thing and remove the paint. The second time was this very aggressive, horrid, anti-Semitic.
But it was anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and
About you or about the piece?
I don't know. All I can say is that when I arrived in France the following few days to go and see Hollande, I had armed guards meet me off the train. Terrifying. I promise you, terrifying. But, you know, I'm a bloody artist. Who gives a sorry, excuse me, but who gives a shit about an artist?
Tell the story about the chairs.
What chairs?
Chairs when you met Hollande. Did you sit on a very small chair and he
Yeah,
sat on a...
no, it's true. But it's very, very formal. The whole thing is very formal, of course. Look, anyway.
My other question is about the temporal in your art, because there's a real temporal quality. I mean, when I was both at the train and the shooting into the corner, and Norman kind of alluded to the fact that you're waiting and waiting, and people go away, and then they miss it, and they run back, and it's too late, and then they wait again. But there's a temporal quality even to experiencing the spaces you create with these gigantic forms. So another question I had was, you were proud about there not being seams. And I didn't understand the connection between having seams and creating these monolithic forms.
Well, Cloudgate has no seams. I mean, that's partly why it has this problematic question of scale. Temporal, I see that as a kind of, it's almost as if we're talking about the theatrical. I'm going to shift it a little bit, only to say that it's relatively recently in the making of sculpture that the so-called theatrical has even been it's even been possible to properly talk about it, because it was always a bad word. You know, theatrical, we don't make theatre. You know, we make sculpture. That's a completely different thing. There was this whole, when I was a student, there was a big question about what is a material. Are your materials truth to material? I never understood those things. So I'm interested in these problematic in between.
Perception.
Yeah. But
What it actually seems like.
yeah.
It's all fiction.
I beg your pardon?
Bernini
Yeah.
made theater
Indeed.
from
Indeed.
sculpture.
Indeed. But these they're in between processual. Time plays a role, but of course the most important role that time plays is that moment when you stand in front of something and time stands still. It does something you don't expect it to do. It isn't there. Time, of course, is perhaps the most mysterious of all these quantities.
And you enjoy working in the theatre. You have worked in
I
the
have.
theatre.
I'm just.
We're doing something. We're doing something at the,
yeah, we
at
are.
the moment.
We are. We're doing. Norman and I are.
A little bit involved in, well, he's seriously involved in a production of Tristan
Tristan
and
and
Isolde
yeah.
in London, and
Which opens in a couple of weeks.
Yep. Another question, come on.
Please.
Can you speak up?
Have you ever dreamt of a piece that you couldn't actually create?
Can you hear that?
Have I ever dreamt of a work I couldn't create?
Have you had a dream that you've not been able to realize, or do you have dreams already that you have somehow failed to realize in your head? Is that one way of putting it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we all do, don't we?
But physically, like a structure that you were just told you just couldn't make it.
Yeah, but no.
Great answer.
I don't know the
Another question over there. Can you stand up so we have a better chance of being heard?
Yeah, what was your most technically challenged piece that you produced, and why was it technically challenging?
I'm afraid it does. It has to be any of the bigger stainless steel works. They are enormously difficult to make, and it has something to do with the problem of concavity. And when I was asked to make Cloudgate in Chicago, we thought we could do it. I met this guy in California, who in Oakland, California, who felt he could do it, but I didn't know if he could do it. He didn't know if he could do it. So we went to Boeing and asked them if they would help us, and they said no. So we went to Boeing again and asked if they would sell us their defunct milling machines. You know, milling machines get things perfectly flat, and then we modified the milling machines to make something to get us perfect curves. Now, Cloudgate's made of sheets. Stainless steel is notoriously difficult to work because it warps very easily. Put a little bit of heat in it and it'll do something weird. So we decided to use these milling machines to work across two sheets to bring them perfectly in line. Hugely difficult thing to do.
It was
hugely expensive thing to do.
over many years too.
Well, it took about 6 or 7 years to make, but we went from a budget of $3 million to a budget of, I think it was about $28 million. They didn't say a word. Can you believe it?
They didn't complain.
They didn't complain. It was a wonderful man called John Bryant, who some of you may know, who just went with it.
But you've made, as I said, a symbol of a city. I mean, I was on the London Underground a year ago. There was a huge poster trying to persuade people not to come to the Big Apple and trying to persuade them to go to
The Bean instead.
Chicago. And in fact, what was the thing that they showed on the London Underground? A huge poster was in fact your sculpture. quite naively, not really even know. I didn't think Anish knew about it. I think I told you about it. Anish doesn't go on the underground quite as often as I do in London. Anyway, another question maybe. We'll have one or two more questions, and I think then we might have to draw this to a conclusion because we're both a little jet lagged. Anish just got off a plane about 3 hours ago, and I came last night, which means I'm worse than he is.
Please.
Yeah.
Personal question, not so much about the work. Do you still see Shirazeh sometime?
I do sometimes. I do.
See?
Please say hello.
Shirazeh Hushiari, who's a Persian artist who lives and works in London. And we used to be very, very close.
I have a question about the blackness. You know, in all the slides you showed us, the start was, and you obviously referred to this a lot, everything was black and void and abyss and going in, and it seems to have moved into light, and then you showed us that other slide where everything was going round and in again. So how far back does this fascination with blackness, and is it something from childhood, from inside you? But black seems so important to you, and then even this optical nanoparticle that you were talking about is again black.
Can I add a question to that? Have you done analysis, psychoanalysis? There you are.
You know I have.
I know, Will.
I've been in psychoanalysis for 25 years or something, too long. I find it absolutely vital. My working technique has something to do with it, I'm sure. But, you know, darkness or blackness, as you say, it's, I'm going to suggest out of psychoanalysis that it's an uneducated part of ourselves. When one thinks of the classical ideas about consciousness, they're always represented, or often represented, as light entering the darkness. So darkness is a proto-condition, prior, before eyes, before being, somewhere that terrifies us. Isn't it? Doesn't it?
And then there
I
was
believe it
light.
does.
And then there was light
Yeah,
after
that's-
blackness.
Indeed. But light enters a prior condition, which is dark. And I think that's something that is ancient enough to be properly part of our before knowing, before thinking, before being kind of condition. I'm deeply interested in it. I think it's fascinating that we carry, each one of us, almost irrespective of culture, carry this thing that is profoundly
And
there as a primal condition.
And ultimately, every piece is a metaphor and nothing more. Would you agree with that?
Every work of art?
Yes.
Yes.
So an object to contemplate, but it's both more and less than itself.
Please.
Another one?
Have you ever considered adding sound to your work?
Many of the concave forms that I make have, because they have a focus, they reflect light and focus it, but they also reflect sound. But I've never added sound to a work, no. Norman.
Yeah, sorry.
Could you just give us perhaps a brief overview? The concept for the beam, for example, is that something you first do by hand and then use any computer agents for your design?
No computers on that one. I did a conceptual, as you say, a drawing, a hand drawing. Believe it or not, that's almost all I presented to them initially. And I don't know why they went for it, but they did. But the idea was to, in a vertical city, to make a horizontal object, first of all, and one that draws in the city. So all the clouds, of course, the sky, of course, but all the buildings are drawn into the object. And then you go underneath it, and it has this sort of domed shape on the inside. So drawing you into it, into the object as in the same way that it draws in the city. So, yeah.
One more question,
Too
and I'm
simple
going to have the
an
last word.
explanation, but anyway.
Somebody right at the back. Okay. Yeah.
Today's world, before it goes to the art world, it might go to somewhere like Silicon Valley. And I think about Vanderbilt and how it's converged first and prior to any other field to an artist. And I want to know, how did it make you feel the moment that you came upon Vanderbilt?
Okay, so the black, Vanta Black, was actually made, as I said, for the defense industry. It wasn't made for me or for... I just prompted them into thinking, into working with the possibility that it could also be a visual material. So it's made to mask, from radar and other things, made to mask aircraft. It's also used on the inside of telescopes to stop stray light from going wherever light goes inside telescopes. And technical things like that, lots of them. In the space program, they use, Vanta Black. So all I've done is suggest that it has visual properties, potential. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to...
That's what I'm working with. We keep developing it. I saw just a little piece the other day, and it really is astonishing. It's almost like it's not there. And I just tried to explain, what happens when you fold it, that the fold disappears. So if you had, I don't know, a classical, let's say, Greek sculpture coated in this stuff, it would appear as a silhouette from wherever you looked at it. And it's extraordinary, like a black hole does.
Like the opposite of a hologram.
Yeah, appear as a silhouette.
Very, very strange.
That the visual world can offer phenomena that have that kind of potency.
I'm just going to draw this all to a conclusion. I just want to say that I've been privileged for the last 10 years of working on a number of projects with Anish. And I can say I go to his studio quite often. And every time I go to his studio, there is something amazing, extraordinary, and wonderful to see, because he's a guy who's endlessly inquisitive about perceptual phenomena and material phenomena, and it's a joy to be with him and a privilege for me. And I think it's a privilege for all of us, A, to be in this room, and secondly, to have a chance of seeing an exhibition of his next week here in New York. And we're grateful that he exists as a great artist and a great friend. Thank you.